Okay, we've heard a lot about where we can get funding, and now the next session will be around selling your idea. How do you actually go about being successful with your funding? So in German there's the saying, paper is patient, saying it won't hold you accountable for what you write down. It's not the same if you're writing a grant application. So how do you actually manage to sell your idea and then actually deliver on what you've promised? My name is Marion Weinzierl. I'm Senior RSE at the Institute of Computing for Climate Science at the University of Cambridge. I've been at Durham University before, and also was Sam's predecessor. He's gone, okay. As RSE theme leader in N8 CAR. And in the last year or so, I've actually been on a lot of grant reviewing panels. So I've reviewed for UKRI, I've reviewed for Inno4Scale, which supports EuroHPC. I've reviewed for the Essential Open Science Software. I've just been running. Essential Open Source Software Call of the Jan Zuckerberg initiative. So I've seen quite a lot of grant applications, but we're here to listen more to what our panel has seen and the experience also in preparing a grant application. So Jeremy, do you want to introduce yourself first?
So yeah, hello everybody again. I'm Jeremy Cohen. I'm a research fellow and director of research software engineering strategy at Imperial College.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Kay Young, Senior Manager in Research Infrastructure at EPSRC. So I read quite a lot of grants, but before I worked at EPSRC, I was in academia, a chemistry postdoc, so I have been on the other side of grant writing as well.
Hi, I'm Matt Probert, Professor of Computational Physics at the University of York. I have experience of grant writing, I have experience of grant reviewing, I have experience of unsuccessful grants and a few successful ones as well. Yeah, we should be able to discuss.
Thank you. The first question we're starting with is, when did you first pitch for funding for your team or project, either through grants or other sources of funding? So do we have a volunteer for this one?
Okay, I'm showing my age now. So my first grant proposal, I was a newly appointed lecturer in 2001, and we had this idea that we needed this thing called a cluster computer. And there was a special thing called the Strategic Research Infrastructure bids, and there was this pot of money for getting infrastructure things. And no one else at the University of York was interested in that kind of thing back in those days. As a newly appointed lecturer, there was this thing called the First Grant Scheme, and if you put your name down as your first grant proposal as lead, then you went into a separate pot, separate panel, and you had special treatment, and it was slightly more gentle, but you were limited in the size of the pot. And we discovered that there was a clause in the scheme that said that if you were on a grant but weren't the lead on the grant, that didn't count. So I was the non-lead on that grant, even though I did actually write the grant, so that I could then put in a science grant sometime in the future as my first grant. So you learn to play the system. You have to read the rules carefully. So the cluster we got was a few £100,000, which in those days seemed like a lot of money, and it was a little baby cluster by modern standards, but it got us started. And we shared it with 3 or 4 different research groups in the department. And I learned a lot about how to write, how to sell your ideas, and how to collaborate with people whom you don't necessarily understand what they're doing, but you can work out how to phrase it and make it look coherent. That was my first experience.
Was it successful?
That first grant was successful. A first grant that wasn't an official first grant. And then my first grant where I was PI was also successful, and that's one that really kind of got the career going. And so, yes, I was very grateful for these first grant schemes. I also discovered that it was first grant per research council. So I was scratching my head thinking, can I get something into NERC? Can I get something to, can I get first grant research? And all these other things too. I tried, I didn't succeed. But I got two first grants with EPSIC, kind of.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, so some of you may remember quite a long time ago now, the UK Science Programme, which was, I think, a great opportunity for people in the kind of the research software space before the research software space, or at least the concept of research software engineers existed, And my first experience of grant writing was actually as a kind of software engineer, stroke RA, I guess, working in a team of people who were doing a lot of kind of multidisciplinary projects and actually contributing significantly to the writing of a grant under that program. And I mean, I think I learned a huge amount about, as Matt was saying, you know, just this sort of the process of kind of how you structure an idea, because I think having an idea and writing that idea in a grant are two very different things. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a really important learning experience for me about how you take a sort of concept of an idea and kind of unwrap it into something that actually makes sense to the rest of the world, or at least the people who are going to review it. And so that for me was really interesting. And then I had sort of multiple experiences following that of writing grants, and again, as a kind of somebody who wasn't at that point eligible to be a co-I or a PI, the opportunity to be a research co-I, which I think is still an option on the EPSRC grants, and I guess for many of the other research councils, which I thought was was at the time, it was quite exciting because it was an opportunity to be kind of recognised on the grant, and not rather than just being a person who was going to be funded by it. And yeah, again, it was like, you know, I think that process, it's quite an exciting process of having the opportunity to get that money. And it looks initially, I mean, again, that was my first grant I think I was kind of named on, was again several £100,000, which at the time seemed like a lot of money. And yeah, it was really, I think, really important experience of going through that process of kind of learning through others what you have to do, because it's a very kind of inexact science, I think, some of this stuff, right? It's really quite a lot of experience that needs to be gathered.
Yeah. We'll go into what actually you learned maybe a bit later on. But Kay, could you maybe talk both about what you've done and what you would do different now that you've seen the other side?
Yeah, so I think, I've never been a PI or project lead on a grant, but when I first got into grant writing was when I was a PhD, because my PI would ask me for my scientific ideas, I'd write them down, and then he would then turn it magically into a grant. And I think afterwards, when I've joined EPSRC, I realised, there's a lot more to just the schemes I was writing or the words I was writing. There's a lot more to putting a Gantt chart together, putting different work packages together, thinking about how much resource you actually need. So it's just the risk, the management, the timeline, when do you need what? And I think there's just so much more to a grant than just the scientific idea, which I now appreciate a lot more, that ideas don't just magically turn into an 8-page proposal.
Thank you. And so Matt had mentioned a bit about communicating with people from different disciplines, and so maybe the next question we could talk about is, how did you actually decide who would be on your grant? How did you approach them? How did you make sure that you're talking about the same thing? Because sometimes the same thing means different things, or has different names in different disciplines, and so how did you collaborate on writing the grant proposal?
So there's two different bits of what you're saying. One is how do you get your team together, and then is how do you actually write the proposal collaboratively. Those are not the same thing at all. But in terms of getting the team together, with the very first grant, I was the newest member of the department, and we quickly realised that there were 3 or 4 different research groups within the department that were doing scientific research, computational research of different flavours, and they all needed more facilities the university could provide. And then it's a case of, so what is it you want to do, and how do we write this proposal that has got a bit of plasma physics and a bit of nuclear physics and a bit of biophysics and a bit of condensed matter physics? How do we make that look coherent? Fortunately, it was a facility type call, and so it's a case they didn't need to kind of overlap too much in terms of the scientific idea. But that's unusual for that type of call to have that flexibility. More normally, you have to make sure the different aspects come together to make a single coherent idea. It's, you hear people talk about elevator pitches and all that kind of stuff. You need to be able to summarise the key idea of your grant proposal into something you can say in 30 seconds or a minute to explain what you're trying to do. And if you don't have that vision of what you're trying to do, it's really hard to write a coherent grant proposal. So you bring the people in that have got the expertise to round that out. Over the years, I've written quite a few grant proposals. I can't think of a single successful grant proposal that's only had a single academic on it. Yeah. I don't think I've even bothered trying submitting one. But it just doesn't work. You can't do this in isolation. You have to have either partners within your institution or partners from other institutions. The more institutions, the more complex. My nightmare was a grant proposal with 19 different institutions on it, for which I was PI, and that took almost a year to get together. Herding cats was nothing compared to herding 23 academics in 19 institutions. So there are techniques to actually doing the collaborative grant writing to actually get that sorted out. But in terms of actually getting the idea, you need to have a vision for what you want to do. You want to be able to summarise that coherently in a few words, and then you can get other people to say, right, I like that, I can help, I have some expertise that's complementary.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have more thoughts on that? Yeah, Jeremy?
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, I mean, I feel obviously in our space, in the DRI space, I think a lot of what we do involves people in different domains. You know, we're often contributing technical skills into other scientific or other research areas, and I guess it's fairly common that when you start putting these projects together, every person who's involved from all the different fields will have the thing that they want to get out of it, the thing they want to achieve, the thing they're interested to do, and so I think it's, on the one hand, finding people is one challenge. Obviously, a lot of us will have people we collaborate with or we work with, having done in the past, and those might be kind of people we would go to as a first port of call to find collaborators. But then there's the challenge of how you kind of get the different pieces of the puzzle that everyone wants to do, and so that everyone has the bits that they are interested in within a coherent whole. Because I guess it comes across very, very clearly in grants when those bits don't fit together well. Yeah. So I think if you put a proposal together which is just an amalgamation of everyone's ideas, it doesn't often look like a comprehensive project. Whereas if you can actually structure it in a way where there's a bigger picture and everything fits, that's really important.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I echo what you've just said. And I think it's not the more the better. Sometimes we find that it could be a lot of collaborators, but are they most appropriate? Often we would look at a proposal and go, well, okay, you've got lots of disciplines that your grant proposal touches into. Do you have the expertise in the different areas? Or do you have someone, if it's a very industry-focused proposal, do you have someone from industry? So it's not about numbers, it's about the quality. And often for track record, we would see that people go, oh, I've got this big PI on this grant, and then they list a whole string of grant references that this PI has had, and it doesn't tell us anything other than this person's very good at getting grants. But what about this proposal? What is that investigator bringing to the proposal? So what we are often looking for is what is the expertise and experience that person's bringing, and the same for all the co-Is, it's same for all the project partners. And it's what's reasonable, what's most appropriate, and there's no magic number of what's best. And then the only exception is when you said there's often you have co-Is or other places, other people on a grant, the exception would be fellowships, let's say. Yeah. Where you would, of course, be on your own, but get support from your colleagues when you're developing that proposal. It's equally important.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions, anytime, yes, Chris, in a moment, just how do I know that there is an online question? Will I get a hand wave?
So Gronia's behind the pillar. Can you see Gronia?
Yeah, if I move over, I can see the... Okay, Gronia, shout, please, if there is an online question. Chris. Yeah.
Chris Jewell from Lancaster again. I'd just like to pick up on that last point, Kay. So that's really interesting, that this idea of kind of describing the expertise that each of the co-investigators supplies to this particular grant. And I guess, is that the motivation behind the move from just submitting individual CVs to the R4RI kind of sort of combined CV, if you like? And I wonder if you could just contribute some thoughts around why that's come into play and what we should be shooting at within that.
Yeah, so there is a move from traditional CVs to that, and there's several reasons why. One of which is because we are trying to make it more harmonised across the different research councils. That's why you would have heard of the funding service, because we've moved from JES to that. But let's not talk about that too much, because it could take over the whole conference.
It would.
And so, because of other research councils, like you can imagine ESRC or AHRC, it would make more sense to move towards a more narrative CV than a traditional CV because of the researchers across UKRI's remit. And then I guess the second reason is because even within EPSRC, it's not just lecturers or professors who would apply to us. There are research technical professionals, research software engineers that can also be on grants. So for them as well, we want to make sure it's as inclusive as possible. So we're moving towards a narrative CV where you can tell us the expertise that you have in an equivalent experience, rather than saying how many years you've been doing teaching as a professor.
Thank you. James.
Thank you. James Graham, King's College. Following up on the idea of the R4RI, with RSE teams, part of the purpose of the team is sort of to pool our expertise. Is there a feeling of whether we should be sort of writing R4RIs from the team perspective, or should they always be from the individual perspective?
Anyone who wants to take that?
I mean, I'm happy to take that as well. I would say both, because of course individually we want to know who should be on the grant, but also what is the added value of the team working together. Because individuals, if you have collaborations before, that's good to know. So often it's the extra value of bringing these people together. So it would be both, but in a concise way.
I think it's important to pick up that point there, that if you try and get together a brand new team of people who've never worked before and put a grant proposal with that, that's a hard sell. You need to establish a bit of a track record. Not everybody together, but A with B and then B with C. You make an A-B-C collaboration. You can see that's going to work. Establishing a track record, going in from cold with a bunch of people you've hardly ever met and saying, we're going to work together and do all this fantastic stuff. It's a very hard sell. You need to go in stages and build up those collaborations, at least at the smaller level, and then build it all together to a bigger consortium. Grant posts don't have to be big, they can be small. So you can start small and build up your confidence with that.
Jeremy, do you want to add
yeah, just to add briefly onto that, I mean, I think from having had personal experience of writing grants through the new system with teams of people where we've had to do the R4RI structured sections, I think there's always a bit of a challenge in moving to something new just because it's not what you're familiar with. But actually, looking back on it, I think actually it's, from a personal perspective, it's been quite useful. So, it does give you a different way. It's very different to just putting in a standard track record, as you said, with a sort of CV or whatever. And it does make you, think more about, you have less space, so it makes you think more about the kind of what are the key things from each person or each group that they're contributing. And so, yeah, I think I can certainly see the value, and I think it to some extent does address that challenge.
Thank you. Just making sure that anybody down there, any questions? No online questions? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe sort of going on from that.
Could you stand up, please?
Yeah, sorry, Martin O'Reilly, the Alan Turing Institute. So going on from maybe James's question and some of the discussion around it, like with this sort of new approach, is the idea, it's not one I've used yet, so is it still sort of just about the sort of named sort of co-investigators who are taking responsibility for various bits, or I think one of the things James was kind of touching at was the fact, the experience of the unnamed people who will sort of be on, the grant doing the doing. So, rather than it's these 3 PDRAs, or we're going to hire we're going to have a PhD student. It's actually there's going to be 2 RSEs from this well-established team. They know what they're doing. They've already worked, with a bunch of people, and sort of part of that working together experience is, it's from that structure, and it's potentially some of those folks might have worked together. So what's this sort of I guess I'm trying to work out that balance between sort of the track record of the whole team versus here's the PI and the co-I's kind of approach.
Good.
Okay.
I think you're also touching on to the justification of resources section as well, because a lot of grants don't necessarily have a named PDRA at the time of submitting the grant application. So more often than not, it's the justification of how much resource you need on the grant. So it could be, if it's someone you know who will be a named researcher, then it would make sense to include them in the track record section. But then if not, if you're hoping to get how many PDRAs onto that grant, it'll be in the justification and also in the Gantt chart of when you're planning to hire that person and what they will contribute to the project.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to a different set of questions, a bit more around how to actually write the grant. So Jeremy, you said you learned how to structure your idea. Is there anything you can share in a concise way about, or is it your secret for this?
So, I mean, I guess this probably sounds really obvious, but actually, I guess the most important thing I feel is proposing to do something you want to do. And I say that because I think if you look at calls, often it's very easy to get wrapped up in the sort of text of a call and what it's looking for. And often you see a call and you think that's something which is a great opportunity for, and this, I suppose, doesn't go so much for responsive mode, but certainly for calls that we see more in the kind of DRI space, it's very easy to see something, think it's something that fits what you want to do. And then over time, you might find you have to sort of shift your idea to fit into the call. And often you can end up, if you really, and I say this again from personal experience, you can often end up having something which changes enough that it ends up being something that's not quite what you thought you were going to do in the first place. And on the one hand, it's very nice to get things funded, but it's also probably not great to get something funded that isn't quite what you wanted to do. So, part of the value of what we do in our space is that we get to do stuff that we want to do and that we enjoy doing. So, of course, there's always a trade-off, I appreciate, with these things. But I think, it's kind of having that enthusiasm for the thing that you want to achieve. And if you have that enthusiasm and if you are really, really kind of keen to do a particular thing, that comes across, I think, in the writing.
And how do you structure that?
I think, so in terms of, obviously the structure is at some level dictated by, what we have to do in terms of the funding system we're using, be that JES before or the funding service now. But I think that obviously there needs to be a very clear high-level narrative of what you want to achieve, and that sometimes is actually quite easy to write if you've got an idea that you're enthusiastic about. But what can often be a lot more difficult is how you break that down, and so how you take your idea and how you kind of think about it, as Kay was saying before about things like work packages and whatever. How do you structure that idea? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that other than just that it's experience. And I think the more opportunities you have to do these things, and particularly working with others. I mean, as I mentioned previously that I think I've had a lot of experience now working with other people on these things, and that's, I suppose, where you build that experience, is seeing what works and what doesn't work. I think unfortunately, but probably it's the case for all of us. I've had a lot of opportunities to see things that haven't been funded, and I think that also gives you it's a very useful learning experience. It's not very nice when something doesn't get funded, but it's at the same time it really helps to see. And often at the time, it's very easy to get kind of wrapped up in just being unhappy that you didn't get something you wanted to get. But actually afterwards, you can often look back and see why it didn't get funded, and that again is a really useful learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to pick up what Jeremy said and take it one step forward, one way of getting experience is to be a grant reviewer. And I think being a grant reviewer and seeing a variety of grants coming across from a variety of sources, EPSOC is wonderful, but it's not the only source of funding out there. And so getting a variety of grants from other places and reviewing those grants is a really useful way of seeing how other people have gone about tackling it, thinking, okay, that's a good way of expressing an idea, that's a good way of structuring a report. When you go to the call doc, obviously there's the science case of what you're trying to do. There's also criteria. And as a referee, you realise that people who structure their grants where you can say, here's the criteria, here's the grant, can I go tick, tick, cross, cross? It makes your life as a referee much easier. So write your grants in a way that's nice to the referees, and you're going to get on better with things. So EPSOC have this thing called the college, where you can apply to join. Occasionally they do a call when they realize they're a bit low on numbers, but you can apply to join, and you get some training in how to assess grant proposals, and that's really useful before you get let loose on real grant proposals, live grant proposals. and then you get to actually do some grant reviewing. And that's really useful. Now you might say, oh, I'm too junior to be part of the college. You know, they're trying to advocate early career people coming in to get the experience. It's not a closed shop. It amazes me that some of my senior colleagues have never been in the college. And I'm thinking, A, you're missing out on sharing your experience, and B, you're missing out on learning some very useful stuff. It really is a two-way street being a member of the college. Yes, you have to review, and sometimes that can be a bit onerous, but you get an awful lot of insight as to what's going on and how to do these things. And even if you can't get into the college for whatever reason, maybe your line manager won't allow it, there are ways you can review grants internally. Most big organisations have an internal review process because it's so important to get your grants funded. They have set up these kind of internal review processes where you have an idea, you structure your proposal, it gets sent round some critical friends within your department, within your group, before it's even let out the door to go to EPSIRC or whoever your funder is. And be part of that group of people that's looking at things and critiquing things, and you're gaining experience so that when the time comes to write your first proposal or your nth proposal, you have a refresh on how to structure things, what things work well, what things you can ask for money for you never thought you could put into a proposal, etc., etc. It's really useful to read other people's proposals. It's like as open source, read other people's code, you get ideas. Read other people's grant proposals is a really good idea. Do it.
Yep, thank you. And I also want to really stress the point of taking the call and use it as a checklist for your proposal.
Criteria.
I mean, it's true for any type of application, basically. But really go through and make sure the reviewer can just check off all these points. So does the audience have any tips or tricks for writing grant proposals they want to share? Yes, please.
So I just echo what Matt has just said. Not just for researchers and people applying for grants, but the infrastructure support people in the RSEs. Get involved in that approval phase for the grants. You can provide really useful input on the computational aspects of it, and make sure that they're asking for the right number of million core hours instead of thousands and stuff like that. But it's also really interesting to see the background of it and what the researchers are asking for, and that gives you extra insight into what's going on. It's really worthwhile. And I have been on the college as well, which was really fascinating.
Thank you. Any more tips for first-time grant writers? Yes, please.
My name is Christian, case colleague at APSRC. I think this is quite simple. When you submit grants, I would suggest to state as clearly as possible the remit where it falls, because we have that struggle at the back end in deciding where to put what grant. So if you can, as much as possible, state the remit in UKRI where it falls, at least at most 2, so you can get it moving as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Any more? Anyone online?
I can just add to
Yeah,
that
okay.
as well.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great if you can make our jobs easier by telling us things more clearly, because often I could read half of the proposal and I still don't know what they're actually asking for. And so getting to the point is my main kind of key message I want to ask people to do when they're writing grant proposals. And like what I said earlier in the morning session, if you can sell it to someone walking down the street, then it means that you'd be able to sell it to others who are peer reviewing your proposal, or people who are sat on the panel who's prioritising your proposal. And yeah, it's no secret, we use the assessment criteria that we publish online, and it is basically ticking how closely you match the assessment criteria. So please do read the core documents clearly, because everything we have or we know about is written there. There's no any hidden information that we wouldn't publish that's not on the core document.
Can I just have one
Yes,
thing?
Matt.
The other thing to say is, hopefully you've met two EPSOC reps over yesterday and today. They're really nice, friendly people. And in my experience, that's almost universally true across all of EPSOC and other funding agencies are available. So don't be afraid to ring them up and ask for help and advice. So I found, maybe you'll tell me different, but I found that if you have an idea, you're not quite sure, is this within remit? Is this going to fit? Picking up the phone and talking to the person on the other end of the line who's in charge of that call or has delegated that call to some junior person to actually look after it. You can get to them and actually talk to these people. These are not just faceless bureaucrats. When I started as a junior lecturer, the EPSOC were up there and we were down here. And that was my mindset. And it took me a few years before I actually met my first real EPSOC person in the flesh and I realised that actually they're interesting people, they're nice people. They're not there to stop me getting money. They're there to help me and help my research career and help research happen. And that was quite a light bulb moment. And discovered that, when we had, so I've mentioned that mega proposal with those people, we rang up EPSOC and had a conversation and said, no, we just cannot get it all into 6 sides of A4. Now, how on earth are we going to do this? And said, okay, we'll have a word. We'll see if we can get special permission. They got special permission of 2 more sides of A4 because I asked nicely, and we had a big collaboration, and they could see the value of what we're doing. And they wrote a little letter to go with the referees to explain why you had the extra sides. I'm not saying to do that for everybody, but approaching them and talking through ideas. Is this in remit? What kind of call would this fit into? Am I pitching this in the right call? You might say, no, you've misunderstood the call. This is not for that. But there's another call over here that's coming up in 6 months' time for which it will fit. Contact them, talk to them.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yes, we are just normal people. So we always welcome people to talk to us. And I think for all of you, you should work out who is the portfolio manager or senior manager who's in EPSRC for the field that you're working in. There is always lots of staff turnaround, so I do appreciate that. You might then realise the person you've always been speaking to have now moved on to a different role. But speak to one of us, or in all of the funding opportunities, at the bottom there's contact details for the team. And often if you email the team inbox, we would then tell you who the best person is to answer your query. And then often we are happy to set up meetings and chat to you about your proposal. And as Matt said, we would let you know what other opportunities might fit your proposal better, so you don't have to, as Jeremy was saying, change your idea because you try to fit what we've put in the core document. There might be somewhere else where your proposal would sit more squarely in. So hopefully, yes, the message is we are just normal humans, just like you guys, that we're not high up there, we're all on the same level.
Thank you. Maybe a bit more about how to actually write the proposal. So when I was on project teams who wrote the proposal, I've basically seen 2 types of collaborations. They're actually quite similar to when you write a research paper. The hot potato and the seesaw. So one is you have this document and you try to get people to write something in this section, like you pass it on. You write this section, you write this section. Nobody has written something here, so you really struggle to get someone to write these parts. And then you have the seesaw where somebody writes something, the other person rewrites it, and it goes forth and back, and you have a tug of war what the proposal or the paper or whatever actually will be. So do you have any experience of writing processes that worked really well, or a way of actually making this work so that it's not redundant work that is done, but also not, oh yeah, well, we somehow have to fill something in here, so somebody write it. Yeah, Jeremy?
Say something on that. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are sort of interesting ways of describing different approaches, and I think I've probably seen all of those. And I think the other approach, which is often perhaps the easier one, but maybe not necessarily always the right one, is where you have somebody who kind of takes on the process of coordinating everything, and sort of, so you get input from people, from your sort of partners and whatever, but perhaps more in the form of kind of bullet points or whatever, and then someone kind of brings it together. And I guess the benefit partly of doing that is that ultimately, when there's a big team of people, it's very difficult to have something that isn't coherent, because it's just, this person has this bit of text, this person has this bit of text. You need to link everything together, and sometimes the process of making a bunch of ideas that people have written down into something coherent is actually more time consuming than, you know, one person bringing it all together from the start. And I guess there's no perfect way, and it's whatever works for the team. But I do think that there's a lot of time investment normally needed from one or two people in these kind of things to make that case of everything looking like it's one story rather than 5 stories that somebody's tried to link together. And that there isn't perhaps there isn't a perfect way to do that. But as you say, I think there are other options, and they can work. If you've got a team of people, particularly who are experienced at working together writing grants, then often, you know, people know kind of how each other work and what are the kind of key points that people want to get across. And then sometimes, you know, passing something round between groups and letting people contribute can work. But I do think normally it needs somebody, and that's likely to be the PI, I guess, who's going to be the person who kind of really does take on the task of making it into a consistent story and bringing together all of those different parts.
I very much agree. I think it's usually the PI that does that, and I think to make it a coherent narrative, you need to have one or a small number of people who are kind of driving the text. You get ideas and contributions, but you need to drive it. You need everyone else to approve it, but this way you give people comment access, not edit access to your documents. So they can put their comments in, and you can then weave it into a coherent narrative, so using the same language and the consistency of ideas. So yes, they want to feel involved and they can contribute. But yeah, my first big network proposal, I foolishly emailed everybody out and said, send me your science ideas. We got 6 sides, so it's about a third of a slide per person. One person sent me 3 sides of A4. Okay, so I quickly realised that you have to control the narrative a bit better than that. Otherwise, you spend forever editing, and trying to get it down and make it coherent. It just doesn't work. You can save yourself an awful lot of time if you set better expectations. But you do need to get people's input, but you need to keep control of the narrative and make sure that big idea doesn't get diluted. So hopefully everyone's joined in because they agree with the big idea. And as Kay said, you need to get that across early in the proposal. What is the big idea, and then how are we going to unpack that, how are we going to do that? People need to know what it is you're trying to do. The referee doesn't want to get to page 3 before they actually find out what you're actually going to do, and wading through 2 pages of background as to how the field's evolved to state where you're going to change it. You need to pitch it so they get the idea and then unpack it. But you need to control the narrative. So benign dictatorship is my model.
Thank you. Any comments from the audience? Yeah, Martin.
Hi, Martin O'Reilly. Yeah, just on this one, I think I've experienced that from a different approach. So I've been involved in a few things, not just in academia, where the initial approach is very collaborative, kind of synchronous kind of writing. Some people might get together and write a bit, and others will. Lots of comments all over the place. But that thing you described of a couple of people needing to basically have slightly dictatorial ownership is I think a critical phase you've got to go through. So for a recent one, myself and one of my colleagues happened to be at something like this together, and we took 2 hours out of the afternoon and we just rewrote everything from all the conversations we'd had. It meant moving a bunch of stuff around, it meant killing people's words, and then we sent that out to sort of be reviewed. But that's, I think, recognising that however you get to a first draft, whether that's something you're sending around for comment or that you then might have to re-edit, but you're re-editing your own stuff, or whether you're sort of hacking other people's stuff together, that sort of permission from everyone involved, that someone can just kind of completely change what's there is that's a really necessary step to get to quality, I think. However you collaborate.
Thank you. More comments on that? Yes, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Love, Manchester. I don't know whether it's how relevant it is, but the computer scientist Simon Peyton-Jones has written a series of things which was sort of how to give a great research talk, how to write a great paper, and how to write a great grant proposal. And it may or may not be relevant to us, but it might be worth thinking about somebody actually writing that down and publishing it. I'm always very impressed by what he does, I must say. And it's at least worth reading and thinking about, even if you're not a computer scientist.
Yeah, thank you.
I.e. not a scientist. Sorry, I.e. you are a scientist, not a computer scientist.
I think there is certainly it's merit in reading other people's ideas and thoughts on how to do these things, and some kind of mentoring scheme or some way of getting experience. It's a good way of doing that. So don't be afraid to talk to colleagues about how they do these things, whether in your department or outside. You know, you don't have to write in isolation. It's not plagiarism to talk to someone else about how you go about structuring a grant proposal. So the more ideas, the more inputs that help you to get over those initial hurdles is a good thing.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I guess, to all this, we'll be talking a lot here about kind of the process of writing down your idea and how you structure your idea, but we were kind of, I guess, neglecting at some point all of the other stuff that you have to do when you write a grant, which is all of the things like the, you know, getting the funding stuff dealt with and all of the kind of other administrative aspects. And I guess partly, I mean, you know, that's stuff you have to do, but it's also something which I guess relates quite a lot to your idea, because, well, it's part of your idea, but it's, you know, how you determine how many people you need, how you justify how many people you need, and the resource that's going into that is something that can be really challenging. And it's sometimes something which is more of a kind of, you know, there's a recipe to it. So things like, you know, getting all of the kind of funding stuff sorted means liaising often with a lot of people at your institution and being able to get people to put down figures, and then if you're doing a multi-institutional proposal, you know, getting all the different details from all the different institutions. And that can be something which I guess does come from experience, and often it's just knowing who to call up and ask for the right things. But it's also something which is really a time-consuming part of the process, and it can also be quite challenging at times, you know, getting the right, liaising with all these different people. There is obviously liaising with the people you're writing the bid with, but also dealing with admin at lots of different institutions and whatever is something which is often, you know, not straightforward, because everywhere does things slightly differently, and you need to know how everything kind of maps across all of the different elements of what you're trying to put together. So I think that's something that is a really important part to remember, because on top of getting your idea organised, you are going to be assessed on whether those other elements of the proposal that you're preparing are correct and make sense and fit with the structure.
Very much so, and there is a timeline with that. Most organisations will put out, you know, you must get your all the admin stuff sorted, and it must go into some kind of internal review process at least 2 weeks before the submission deadline, or depends on the size and the cost. If it's £1 million plus grant, 3 weeks before the deadline. You have to factor those timelines in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exactly what I was going to say. Like, so many people have been caught out by internal deadlines in institutions, so often we would say you should have spoken to your research office to find out, or your department or faculty to find out if there's internal processes. And so for some of the bigger calls, there could be internal sift panels. So your institution, if they're only allowed to submit 3 proposals or 5 proposals, often you would have an even earlier deadline to try and get through those at that peer review process before it actually gets submitted to us.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question there.
Yeah, hi everyone. Bill Ayres, University of Manchester Library. This is the perfect lead-in for me, so don't forget the data management plan. Everywhere obviously deals with these in slightly different ways, but for our library we do have potentially a 10-day turnaround for that. So this is something where we do often get people kind of desperately saying we've got a deadline next week. We try and work with that, but obviously if you can do that as early as you can, and we do have expertise, this will be the same across many of the universities and other institutions. There are people there that can help with that. We can make sure the DMP is going to be in really good shape to get you through. So yeah, just please don't forget us.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes now, so I've got a couple of more questions, but I just wanted to ask, are there any questions or comments from the audience, from online? No, anything that you would like to take advantage of the knowledge of this panel? Any questions you came across when you wrote your grant proposal and you really wanted somebody to ask? Yes, James.
Hi, James again. I guess it comes into some of the discussions that we've already had around sort of mentoring. Coming into sort of writing our first few grants from a DRI and RSE perspective, it feels like it's harder to access that sort of institutional memory about how grant writing works, where if you're sort of following a traditional academic pathway, there's sort of obvious mentors in place for you to guide you on that. Is there anything that we can lean on there, or anything we should be doing to make that a bit easier for people from sort of non-traditional academic routes?
Yeah, Jeremy?
So I think that's a really good question, and I feel that, so part of the challenge here, I think, is that institutions that have less awareness or recognition of the RSE side of things, or the technical side, the other aspects of the DRI space, often don't see people in those roles as people who write grants. And so sometimes it's not just the fact that you can't access the information, it's the fact that they don't think you need to, and it's all kind of hidden from you. So it's not just knowing who the right people are to ask. And I think a lot of that can be addressed just through kind of a sort of process of advocacy around, you know, the importance of, if you're an institution where you've got an RSE team, obviously that team can work with the relevant people at the, you know, sort of higher levels of the institution that manage all of this stuff, to raise awareness of that, to tell people that yes, these people in the DRI space are doing grants, do get involved in grants and need support with that. So I think it's more about maybe getting the institutions to understand that we, not just that we exist, but that we do stuff in this space. And once that's the case, I think accessing that information is a lot easier. Because I think a lot of what you're talking about there is things that you can learn from working with other people as part of a team doing a grant. But you often get kind of slightly left behind or forgotten if you're in a space where people don't think that that's something that matters to you. So maybe that's, I don't know if others have more.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And thinking of a case that happened a few years ago when we were still using JS, where I wanted to have someone as a co-I on a grant, and I couldn't find them in all the lookup boxes.
Yeah.
They hadn't been entered, and they were perfectly eligible, but somebody in HR hadn't joined the dots saying that this particular career role meant they should be on JS. So we had to go through that process to get them added, and that took a little bit of time, and added to the pressure of getting the grant proposals done by the donor. But once they're added, they're in the system. But get those things going early and make sure that the right people are in the system. Don't be afraid to get people added, and nudge HR and all the other people that are involved in these things to make these things happen.
Thank you. Yeah, Martin.
Hi, Martin again. Yeah, I think maybe following on that thing about, are folks recognised as people who can be a co-investigator on grants? I think the UKI have done a lot of good work sort of in recent years, especially EPSRC, on sort of recognising that themselves. But when you sort of trawl through the official guidance, while RSE is kind of mentioned somewhere as can be costed onto grants, when you look at the criteria for who can be a co-I, who can be a PI, they're quite sort of aligned to lecturer or equivalent, and sort of what does that mean, and sort of sort of the sort of nature of roles and so on. And I think sort of a bit of more explicit clarity on that could sort of help in a lot of organisations where I think it's not that people want to exclude people, it's just that they have sort of very fixed ideas about what's eligible or not.
But I think that's down to the institution, not down to the funding councils. Because at some institutions, RSEs are very much on a professional track, and they go the technical progression route, and some they're on an academic track, and they go on a different progression route. And there's no universal agreement, in my experience, where DRI sit within the technical, professional, academic world. And so EPSRC or UKRI can't legislate on that because they don't control the HR policies of different universities. They can try and steer. So in my experience, the HR makes assumptions, but assumptions aren't always right. And if you say to them, this particular DRI professional needs to be on this grant, it's a way of getting money to the institution. They don't generally kick up too much of a fuss if you give them a bit of a kick. And so you get them added. And I've not experienced, you may tell me otherwise, EPSRC saying, no, that person's not eligible, you've got to take them off. I've not had that.
I've seen the person having in my organisation, I was kind of one of the people having to kind of make that call of what lecturer equivalent looks like, and we started out by tying it to some seniority level in the team, and then we had people who clearly were the best person to lead that piece of work and had to re-question that. And so even where the organisation is most up for it, we're sort of trying to figure out kind of maybe this is the call your EPSRC person stage, actually, from just going back to the previous advice. So I think it's less about legislation and more about permission, I guess. Sort of knowing that something's possible, and therefore it is just about making that case internally.
Yeah, there's times where we've got queries and people have asked, am I allowed, are we eligible? And sometimes HR or your research office just needs an email from us just to confirm that, and we're happy to write that email when you are eligible for it.
Thank you. Do we have one more question from the audience or from online? No. Online? How many people are there online? 16, very quiet. Yes, Emma.
Hi, Emma Hogan, Met Office. I just wondered whether you could comment on how people can receive feedback from their grant proposals. So when you evaluate a proposal, is there a policy that you have to store feedback so that, from a fairness perspective, so that, then if people do ask that it's there and it's available as to the reasons why the grant wasn't given. So yeah, any kind of comments you can give on how people can get feedback.
Okay, probably.
Yeah, happy to talk from the Research Council perspective, but I also think from the institutions you can get feedback from colleagues or Research Office. But from Research Council, we would be clear in our calls when you would get feedback. If it's an outline proposal, you might not necessarily get feedback, but if it's gone through postal peer review, the feedback you'll get is the reviewers' comments. And at that point, you would then have the PI response to rebut to any of the comments that reviewers have said. And depending on what panel, if you go through a prioritisation panel or interview panel, depending on that and the number of proposals, we might or might not be giving feedback when we're communicating the outcome to you. But often we would outline it really clearly in our funding opportunity whether we'll give you feedback. Okay. And often, yeah, again, you can speak to the person who's leading on that scheme, and we would be able to tell you if there's any notes or anything that we can give to you. So just contact us.
Thank you. So we're almost at the end. I want to ask one thing from the UKRI people. So as somebody who's on review panels a bit, I find it really frustrating that I never hear back directly who's actually get funded, because you get so attached. You review them, you might interview them, and then you want to see how they are doing. And last time I asked for that, I got the response like, no, we're not doing that. You can look it up then sometime when it comes on. It would be really, really nice as a reviewer to actually get an email saying, even just saying, oh, here's the link to where you can see who was funded.
Yeah, so Grants on the Web is the website where we put all of the results. And so if you sat on a panel, you can search it by the title or the
exactly.
date.
You can search for it, but it would be really nice to get an email
we don't
when that's
manually actually notify all the people who are on our panel.
It would be really, really nice to get that feedback.
It will also be quite a bit of resource.
We're almost at the end, so I just want to give each of you basically one sentence that you would like to, basically your main message on this topic of selling your idea that you would tell somebody who goes and writes a grant. So I'll give you a couple of seconds if you need them.
I would say try it, go for it, get internal review, get critical friends to look at it before you let it out the door. If it can't survive critical scrutiny from your mates, it ain't going to get past the referees.
Thank you.
Yeah. Same, don't be afraid of showing your proposal to others. Don't be afraid of speaking to us in EPSRC or any of the research councils. We're more than happy to help.
Thank you.
And I guess I would say don't be afraid of having ideas and wanting to achieve something from them. Get involved and try and do something. Don't sort of sit on your ideas and think about it. Do kind of talk to people and go for it, basically.
Thank you. So the message is basically don't be afraid. Thank you.
Oh, and finally, you don't always succeed. Pick yourself up and try again.
Yeah.